My guest today, Carole Hooven, who wrote an incredible book that I've started to read. You all know that watch and listen at home. I don't read a ton of books, but hell of a book called T, The Story of Testosterone, the Hormone that Dominates and Divides Us. She is a evolutionary biologist at Harvard, has been for 20 plus years. And as we have been discussing through this series, we're talking about a very tricky subject, and I wanted to go to a place where I could get educated, and you all could get educated. And spoiler alert, it is also a place that got messy. So hope you enjoy it. Carole, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lance.
Well, you know, we're going to get into this issue that as I've come to learn, and it's not always the view that's shared by many, but I view this as a complicated issue, and it's the issue of trans in sport and how we approach this, and of course, just following, your career and some of the stuff you've done, interviews and podcasts. I thought I have to talk to this lady.
Yeah.
Because as far as I'm concerned, I think, because I'm not, and I tell people this all the time, like I just sort of, if you don't, and a lot of things I don't know, so I just defer to the smart people. Say, well, listen, let me ask the field, let me ask the smartest people out there. But we'll get to all of that. It's all, obviously, as we've seen just in the last couple of days, a highly polarizing issue, which is the reason I wanted to talk about it. And I think you've been so brave to just not necessarily take this on, but share what you know, share your experiences. Obviously, this book, which I've just started to get into, your book, T, The Story of Testosterone, the Hormone that Dominates and Divides Us. I read like 3 chapters this morning.
Oh, really?
Well, you sent me the PDF, so this morning you gave me the actual book, which was great.
Yeah.
I think just to start, like, let's just talk about, I think as a guy, when you think about testosterone, and I think there's a lot of stigma with testosterone. Like and even in sort of what I do for a day job, there's all of these platforms where guys can take testosterone and feel younger and have higher sex drive and can look better and all of these things. I think there's a faction, or there's, I think most women, certainly on the investing side, go, oh, we're not touching that. This is gross.
Testosterone.
To my point of the stigma around it.
Yeah. So you're saying the guys that and you think guys in general think about testosterone as a drug.
Right.
That not only do you have it naturally, you can also buy it and take it to enhance your appearance, maybe be tougher and stronger and bolder and sexier, et cetera.
And potentially healthier.
And healthier, yeah.
I mean, I think there's again, I'm not a doctor, but I suppose there's an argument to be made that you're healthier, right? Osteoporosis and libido and energy and I don't know, all of those things sound.
Yeah. So, but then what about women? Because we don't have a lot of testosterone, so we have.
Well, I'm not
about
a woman, so
a tenth of the
I'll
amount.
trust you on this as well.
Okay. We have so much less than males, and that's starting in utero at just a few weeks after conception. The male testosterone goes way up and has really significant actions on the brain and body, and females don't have that, even from that, very, very early developmental stage.
So the mom's body knows, because I've read a lot about this and you write about it in your book. So the mom's body, and for those listening or watching that don't know, so the mother's body, right, I guess figures out that they're having a boy or a girl. And this is in layman's terms, I know, which has made this whole thing even more complicated. Like, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say the mother's body knows she's having a boy or a girl. I might get in trouble for that. But
yes,
I really don't care.
Possible, yeah.
That's highly possible. But for the layman, which I am, the mother's body knows they're having a boy or a girl, and at some point says, I'm having a boy. And as I read it, the boy is essentially, whatever the process is or processes, the boy is swimming in testosterone.
Yeah, his little testes are producing a lot of it.
And this is all developing, and he's whatever, knowing or becoming a boy.
So he was a boy at conception.
Right.
And then he's developing his male traits, reproductive traits in particular. And it is, those are sort of signaled by the Y chromosome prior to testosterone exposure. So testosterone develops the penis and the internal reproductive organs in the masculine direction, but the male sex is established at conception because of the existence of the Y chromosome. But what's interesting is that evolution uses testosterone in essence to coordinate the male brain with the male reproductive structures and the later ability to produce viable sperm. So sex in organisms has to do with whether that organism is designed to produce small mobile gametes and lots of them, or a few larger, generally immobile gametes and just a few of them.
Ovaries
eggs and sperm. So in general, the sperm producers develop a suite of characteristics that enable them to compete to fertilize the egg producers. And this is across organisms. So people tend to conflate sex itself, which is just the body plan, basically whether the organism is developing the body plan to produce sperm or eggs, with all of those other traits that are associated with sperm or eggs.
Right.
So those are binary, the sex, and then all those other traits are on a spectrum.
But what you've said so far, right? This is biology 101.
You would think.
No, but it's
not anymore. It's probably not.
Well, I want to get into that because that to me is the era that we're living in. But that is, I mean, nobody refutes what you just laid. I mean, we're sort of starting at ground zero.
They kind of do. They that is what is happening now.
There are people that have a different view of that.
Yes.
But
we don't have to get into that yet because that is just will complicate things. But yeah, that's the fact. And evolutionary biologists have, almost all of them recognize this fact, and it's fundamental to biology that there are two reproductive classes. There's no other gametes other than sperm, or than sperm and eggs, and there's two. That doesn't mean there are organisms. There's some fish that can change sex. There's some worms that can be essentially produce sperm and eggs at the same time. So,
and in humans, we have conditions or other possibilities.
So that's a whole other area. There is almost no evidence of a human who can produce viable sperm and eggs. And even if there were, that wouldn't invalidate the concept of two sexes. It would just mean that this individual has the capacity to produce both gamete types. There's still only male and female gamete types. So, but we're mammals, and mammals are one or the other sex. But that's not the case in every other kind of species, essentially. So, but mammals produce sperm or eggs.
Right. It's funny, I haven't thought of myself as a mammal ever, really, until reading your stuff. Yeah. And you know what I love about the book, and I haven't read the whole book yet, but it flows so well.
Well, thank you.
Like just you pointed out a couple sections to read in, and I was just sort of jumping around. It just, and for those listening and are remotely curious, which I think people will be after this series, but it has this flow to it. It was so easy to, I'm not a big reader. I can't tell you the last time I sat down. I mean, I read a lot. I read news and I read research and I read for work, but I don't sit down. I'm not one of these people that sits down and says, "Oh, this book is so great. You should read it." I'm like, honey, I'm never going to read that book.
Because you're moving around so much, you probably don't
the flow of this book. It was just really well done. You write this yourself?
I did. Well, you know what?
That's the other thing. I've written 2 books and I had a ghostwriter, Sally Jenkins, but I can never imagine, not only reading a book, imagine writing one.
Yeah, it's hard. And that was the first book I've ever written. But I have to say, when you say by yourself, yeah, I wrote the book. But my husband, for instance, read everything I wrote and edited it. And we talked about it.
Mhm.
And so I had
some help.
And I had other people read, experts read each section to make sure I wasn't getting anything wrong. And, they would suggest edits. So I think, and I felt like, is this okay? Are people allowed to make these edits? And that's just how it is when you write a book. You really, people get a lot of help.
Right.
I could not have done it alone. Like it wouldn't be what it is, I think, if I hadn't had the help
and
I
you
had.
have a certain status, right? You went to Harvard. You've been at Harvard for
well, I started my PhD in 1999, and then I just stayed and left.
And taught.
Taught the whole time and co-ran the undergraduate
you would want
program.
And people look up to you and know the name. So you would, I would imagine you'd want some cross-checking that I would want that.
Well, yeah, if you're writing a science book, I mean, that's just par for the course. Everybody needs to make sure that, I can't be a master of all these different areas in depth. So you always have experts read.
And it's to me, this whole conversation, in and around the trans community and sport and where they intersect, and is this fair? Is this not fair? Are there solutions? There's just so much that as I've gotten into it, and it's almost on a daily basis, there's something new, like, in just sort of popular culture, there's words and phrases over time you're just not allowed to say, right? You're not allowed to say rule of thumb anymore.
You're not? Because
No.
some people don't have thumbs.
No, I don't think.
Why can't you say rule of thumb?
As it was told to me, the origins of rule of thumb is, I don't know, 500 years ago, men were allowed to cane their women. This is as it was told to me. I didn't. I didn't cancel the phrase.
Oh, okay.
But anyways, hundreds of years ago, men were allowed to cane their women, but they could not cane them with a cane wider than the width of their thumb. So that was the rule of thumb, as it was told to me.
Okay, but that means they were trying not to to inflict as much pain as they could. They were trying to reduce the pain.
I'm just telling you.
So I'm saying you should be able to say rule of thumb because
that's
you're trying to protect the females. So
I see where you're going, but my point is there are folks that say you can't say it, right? There are folks you can't say picnic and you can't say ninja and you can't say. Anyways, that's not really important. As we, in modern culture and as we go along and some people call it woke. There's just things you're just not allowed to say anymore.
That's right.
And over time, there's been some things that people said 50 years ago that we say today, and you're like, I agree. Like nobody should ever say that.
Right.
But in this issue, it's almost a daily thing. Like I can't keep up with all of the
language changes.
And really, it's not so much the change; it's the repercussions and the punishment of. I mean, I like just doing this series. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. Like, did I say that right? I feel it's. I heard yesterday you're not allowed to say pregnant woman. I thought, well, okay, well, why not? I mean,
Lance, I think
the landmines are everywhere.
This is one of the most important issues to me is this language policing. So what's tough is we want to be good people. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. I don't think either of us ever intends to insult anyone or make their lives more difficult. So if we're told by people that using these words is damaging to people who already have hard lives, right? Then you might just automatically back off from using those words. But so I understand that. But when doing that compromises our ability to think clearly and to communicate clearly, then that disadvantages our ability to make the kinds of arguments that we might need to make. And it also makes it harder for people in a liberal democracy to participate in discussions openly about policies that we care about. We need to be able to have words that are accurate and clear that we can use in these conversations. And when people can't express their feelings freely, if like a certain population can't express their feelings freely, no matter what side of the debate you're on,
or what the issue is.
Yeah, that's right. That means that we don't have the kind of democracy that we all envision as Americans. So this issue of language is a hill that I will die on, and I did kind of die on it, and it was about male and female. And that's, when I went and ran into problems at Harvard, which we can talk about later. But I think, I was just committed to retaining those two words and what they mean from a scientific, biological point of view. They're incredibly powerful categories that predict so much about who we are and about our world. And that's why I wrote the book. So I'm not giving up on those words. And no one can
You don't regret writing the book?
Not in the slightest. Like there's nothing in there that
you will die on. You just said it. That's pretty strongly worded. And you don't have to answer this, but are you a Democrat or a Republican?
I'm a Democrat.
Okay. And I think that's important.
I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
All right. So you voted for Joe Biden.
Of course.
And you voted for Barack Obama.
Yes.
And you voted for Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
You voted for Bill Clinton. Going back,
Yes, I did. I'm old enough. Yeah.
Because
Thank you.
Because I think this issue.
Wait, Bill Clinton? When did he?
No, you were old enough to vote for Clinton. I might have been old enough to vote for Clinton. As did I in all of those elections. Full disclosure. But I think so many times this is this issue, and especially this issue of and I really hate the term or the idea of woke, but this issue of woke, it kind of comes down to, listening to or watching Sean Hannity or watching Anderson Cooper. It's not, right? I think that's why I ask you if you're a Democrat, because those two, the sides don't align as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
It doesn't appear. But, and I loved your tweet just last week. I think you put it up, and you probably can quote it a lot better than me, but something to the effect of, have we chosen ideology over biology?
Yes. So I was retweeting an article by Jerry Coyne and Luana Maroja. Gosh, I hope I said her name right. They wrote a fantastic article that's been heavily criticized by, I don't like the term woke either, but by people who really don't like this this perspective that ideology is infiltrating biology, which it clearly is. So I retweeted that article, and that was a quote from the article. And I have seen it firsthand. And most scientists, especially who are interested in sex and gender, have seen this firsthand, that in teaching, in research, in academic publishing, obviously also in journalism and corporate America, there's one set of sort of super progressive values that is dominating, and it really is infiltrating the kind of science that is being conducted, is being taught, and is being published and reported, so that the public is getting one particular kind of view, because people like Jerry and Luana are attacked for a perfectly reasonable views. They sort of outline different areas in biology where ideology is clearly infiltrating, and they're attacked as essentially immoral, uncaring, transphobic, racist. So of course people are going to back off from certain questions.
The words, as you've come to learn, I mean, the words are just they're shocking to me, right? And I've lived through, and I've shared some of this with you, and I've shared this with the audience. I've lived through some of this. I mean, I haven't lived through certainly as much as you have. I've told the story of a transgender employee we have that as I've always been transparent about it, I didn't see it coming, as I think most people just, oh wow, okay. It wasn't a topic of conversation, but you know what? The employee, the job, and the trust and the love and the faith and all of that didn't change.
Of course.
But you didn't see it coming. But then there's at some point it crosses the line when you might question as it affects sports. You might question as it affects textbooks or what prison. I mean, the prison stories are there's a lot of examples. I don't know how prevalent they are, but there's a lot of examples. But boy, you cross the line so fast, and all of a sudden, you lose a job, you lose an endorsement, you lose an opportunity. To me, it's just, as I've gotten into this, to me, that's the most amazing thing that and just so fucked up. I don't know that we're headed down the right path. And I said it a second ago, the landmines are there, and there just seems to be more and more of them. And look, this going back to this idea of ideology and biology, I don't know. Like, I'm not very smart, but if I get Alzheimer's or cancer again or something else, I mean, I'm turning to biology and science and research. I just am. I'm not turning to what is the other option. And I'm curious though, because the folks who wrote that paper, Ideology versus Biology.
Can I just pause you for 1 second? Because you just said something that is
You're a crier.
Sorry.
I've listened to a lot of your podcasts.
I know. Sorry. What you said, I think, is the most, important thing in all of this. And that's that you want information, you want facts, because you had cancer, for instance, and say when you have cancer, you need a source that you can trust. And we used to have this gets me very animated and upset. So this is part of what drives me and why I would risked something. It's because it's so important that we take full advantage of all the tools that we have to understand ourselves and the rest of the world, and that people have the right and the ability to communicate that information clearly. And it's not just because we need to participate in democracy and affect policy. It's because this can save people's lives.
Right.
And if we don't trust our institutions, which is what's happened, we're in big trouble. And that is scary to people. And people are scared and they don't know where to turn. And it's causing people to kind of go underground and become more extreme. And so that is kind of a unnerving prospect. So we need people now to speak out about what they believe in, and people who are in these institutions. And that's why Coyne and Maroja wrote that article, because they are trying to convince people who are in these different fields to stick to what they know and to what they believe, and to be able to ask and answer their questions. And it's just,
why is that unreasonable?
Because it's offensive to some people, or some people are saying it's offensive. But I think people are building careers off of calling people names, essentially.
And you said the piece, again, reminder for the folks, Ideology versus Biology, that piece was widely criticized, I think you said.
Well, it's also what made a huge impact. It had many more positive comments, at least when I tweeted it, because of my followers. But then there's plenty of people who want to just tear it to shreds and call the authors bigots. That's what needs to stop. Combat their arguments.
Did they keep their jobs?
Luana has a job. Jerry is retired, essentially. So he has much more freedom to say what he believes. It's very hard to do that from within an institution right now. But some people are, and most of them are suffering for it in some way. They're not like canceled, but their lives do become more difficult.
Jerry sounds like he's uncancelable. I mean, he's if that's even a word. We're making up new words every other day, so it's hard to keep up. But I'm with you. I want to. I will say. I mean, I want to keep my eyes wide open and my heart and soul completely clear and accepting. Yeah. But at the end of the day, again, if we're talking about, and I'm not a biologist, right? And you figured that out already. And I'm not a researcher, but I like to hear smart opinions and facts.
Yeah.
And again, using the example of a major medical issue or something terrible. I mean, I'm going to, as I think most people would, they are going to default to biology. I would hope.
I would hope to. I think they still are. I mean, the feedback that I get from things I've written or podcasts I've been on or from the book is 99% supportive. People cheering me on and saying how much it means to them that someone is willing to kind of stand up and tell what they believe is the truth without, it's not that I don't have fear, it's just that I do it, even in the face of some fear. So people are thirsting for that. And that's the feedback that I get. Of course, I get criticized or called various names also. And that's what, in some sense, it's like when I was teaching and I got generally fantastic evaluations from the students, but it's the one student who's, super critical. That's the voice that you hear.
How many years in a row? I think I didn't know they did this at Harvard. Maybe they do it everywhere, but I guess, there's kind of I'll just simplify. There's sort of a popularity. Who's voted most popular teacher? You were most popular professor for.
Well, no.
Or you won some. The kids liked you.
Yeah, I mean, you get a teaching excellence award if you get a certain school rating from the students, and I would get those regularly. So I had a popular one course that was very popular, and then there's some other. Your
Yelp reviews at Harvard were good.
Basically, yeah. The
comments were good. 5 stars.
Yeah. And
you're a cool lady.
I loved.
It's okay.
Teaching. Sorry. And I miss that, and I miss my students. Harvard. Well, I have some issues with Harvard right now. I never had any issues with the undergrads. They're amazing, amazing, amazing. One of the things that's really hard about this, and that I'm not teaching anymore, is that the subject I taught is behavioral endocrinology. So that's about hormones and behavior. And a lot of that is about sex and gender. And many of the students I became close with were students who were particularly curious about the biology of sex because they were, I'll just say there's a, gender diversity. That's not
and curiosity.
A real term. Yeah, they're curious about their own experience of their own sex, and they might have been gender nonconforming. Lot of gay and lesbian students, a lot of relatively high number of students who were transitioning or thinking about transitioning.
In the class.
Yeah, they would come. They took the class specifically because they really wanted to learn about the biology relating to sex. And I developed particularly close relationships with a fair number of these students and just the undergrads in general. And through teaching, you can really connect. And I learn from them, they learn from me. So part of why this is that I'm not doing this anymore, partly because I've been called transphobic, it does hurt.
I bet.
Because I really care about the experiences of, and now, I've interviewed and just gotten to know a lot of people who have transitioned, and I really do care a lot. And it's hard for me to sometimes talk about the science and use the words I need to use, even because I know that it can be painful.
And why is it? I mean, if the kids come to the class to learn more because they're curious and they can relate to this, I mean, why isn't it enough that the kids just say, the word spreads amongst whatever community it is? They say, you don't take that class. She sucks or whatever. Why is that not enough? And all of a sudden, maybe your Harvard Yelp review goes down. Your class shrinks in half, and you say, well, I guess it wasn't. Why is that not enough?
Why couldn't that have happened?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the class and the book didn't and don't suck. They're awesome. So like that was never the issue. The issue was I went on Fox News and said they're male and female and described what that meant. And it was mostly graduate students who had an issue with that, who didn't even know me and never took my class.
Got it.
Didn't know me personally anyway. And then graduate students can exert pressure on administration, and that can spread on social media. And there was.
You're not alone in this, right? Dr. Joyner at the Mayo Clinic had a very similar thing happen, and I don't know if it was after or something else happened. But I know he was quoted in the New York Times about this.
Yeah, I was quoted in that piece with him.
which I thought was was a great. I'm gonna call it. I mean, it was. I found the piece
on Leah Thomas, or was it? She was featured.
It started a lot with Leah Thomas. Of course, most of the photos were Leah Thomas, but there was it was about this issue.
That's right.
But I just really struggle with. This is if we can't just have opposing views, and your reviews go down, and less kids take the class, and I just think I think we're fucked. I think we're totally fucked.
I think we are too. But what happened to Joyner? Do you know?
Well, he was at
the Mayo Clinic.
He was at the Mayo Clinic, and I don't know what you guys call it.
He was at the Mayo Clinic.
He was put on leave.
Well, they told him he could not. They tried to ban him from expressing his scientific views about the role of testosterone, for instance, in sex differences in sport, and in the as the role of testosterone in trans women's potential advantage in the female category, say. And they told him not to talk about that.
But Carole, we're not. This isn't some edgy fringe thing that we're potentially talking about, or we are going to talk about, or we're going to gag you because you might talk about this. I mean, as I see it, we were talking about, not to minimize it, but we're talking about biology 101. And that's for the people to decide. At the end of the day, like I look at all this, like, look, we're going to talk about all these things, and you all decide. Whoever listens or watches or weighs in or thinks about it, decide. Like that makes absolutely. Then we're fucked.
You mean if you can't even talk about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Which this whole series was about, and we I've seen just in the last couple of days, and of course my situation is probably one of the most complicated situations and polarizing situations.
What do you mean? What's your situation?
Well, you haven't followed the story. So I was a kid in Plain. No, I grew up in Plain. Look, I think it really boils down to, and I'll just sort of make up the headline. How dare you have a conversation about fairness after you had the career that you had, which of course, wasn't. I was not. It depends which lens you look at it through, but most would say I was not the poster child for fairness. So how dare you have this conversation?
Oh, I see. Right.
I came to this really through my own personal experience with our employee. And I also came to it through my personal experience as an athlete, but also in a weird way, as a swimmer. I love I grew up swimming. Swimming was my first sport, my first love. It's still one of my favorite things to do. I geek out on times. If somebody asks me who is the greatest athlete of all time, is it Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, I said, no, you didn't even say the name. The greatest athlete of all time, without a doubt, is Michael Phelps.
Yeah.
There is nobody close.
Yeah.
The amount of, the length of his career, the amount of gold medals, all the personal stuff he came over, and knowing how hard, the life of a swimmer is terrible.
It's brutal.
It is a brutal sport, the training, the preparation, the hours, not to mention the hours of, the long solitary hours of staring at a black line.
Yeah.
You'd all go crazy.
Yeah.
Michael Phelps is by far the best. So I really came through it. So, and then of course the Leah Thomas. and as it's captured my imagination, but that's been that's the retort is, how dare you weigh in on this? But that's fine. But the other, as I have dared to weigh into it, I've almost become more enamored with the whole concept of just not talking about it or not wanting to talk about it. I can't get my mind around how we can't just have the conversation without fear of somebody, of losing a job or being reassigned or being labeled a transphobe or a bigot. Think about those words. Those are serious words.
It works. It works.
Yeah, but it shouldn't work.
But it does work, and it's horrible. It is really awful to go through, to have people you've known for decades and you had relationships with, to either initiate a pile-on, join in on the pile-on, or totally fail to support you when they agree with you and they agree with you and they were your good friends or something. Like going through that and then worrying that people think you're actually a bad person or transphobic or racist or whatever it is, it ruins, people have committed suicide when as a result of this. I am one of the people who, became extremely depressed and had to get some serious help.
Right.
And there are serious mental health repercussions. So it's not to be taken lightly. However,
our stories aren't that different.
That you had a severe depression.
No, I don't.
You mean that you were kind of publicly?
Yeah, there was a highly publicized fall from grace.
Yours was in a much larger scale.
That's neither here nor there. The fall is the fall, and the fallout from
and it's public.
It is, even if it's not that public. It's if you're talking about looking around the room and how many friends or allies are in my room, and overnight, 75% of them are gone. That doesn't have to be publicized. You're in the room.
That's right. But it is freeing in a way, right? And you have a clarity of purpose afterwards.
It's such a dual track. I speak to this a lot, right? And because people say, "Well, boy, it must have been really hard to lose all your sponsors and lose a bunch of money."
And you're like, "Bye-bye,"
and lose friends. And I said, my answer to that, and this is just my view, is I say, yeah, it was hard.
Yeah,
it was hard, right? And as I speak to it, I sort of. I refer to it as the lean out and the lean in, right? So that room was full of people, and you're an athlete or you're a professor or whatever, an artist, doesn't matter. And you're on top of the world, and the room is full, and you're the greatest. And something happens, and they all leave. To me, it was, to your point, like it was amazing, right? And there were the folks that leaned out. And there is a moment. There has to be a moment where you're like, God, that sucks. I thought you guys were here with me.
Yeah.
And would support me not just through all the fun.
And it's shocking.
It is shocking. But the people that are left in the room, and I call those the ones who lean in, to me that far outweighs the instances where the people are walking out of the room. And frankly, this conversation, I knew going into this conversation that the heat might be too high, and there may be people yet again in my life that people might walk out of the room.
Yeah.
You sort of, with having been through the experiences I have, and as you are going through, there's a real strength in that.
So what you're saying, just to me illustrates this basic idea of what kind of person you want to be, what kind of life you want to live, what your values are. Are you going to hang on to your integrity and your principles? Because if you're going to sacrifice that stuff to be who other people want you to be, or to say what other people want you to say, or use the language that's being dictated to you, what kind of life are you living? Like, it might be easier in some ways to do that. Maybe you'll hang on to your career. Maybe you'll make more money. But what happens to your insides? Like, to me, you're crumbling inside. How can you feel proud of yourself and, I don't know, feel fulfilled and have a real purpose?
Right. And you think just to go back to because sounds like there was sort of a moment where there was not an uprising, but there was this consensus, or maybe, I don't know if it was one grad student or 5 or 500, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know either.
And it's not important because it happened. But it sounds like it was, not the book, potentially the Fox News interview, which, by the way, even that comes with all of its complications. Look at her; she's on Fox News.
Well, yeah, that was bad enough.
That's bad enough. For I can only
just
imagine
appearing on Fox
Right,
News.
I can only imagine.
Can I just say something about
of course.
that?
You never watch Fox.
Well,
I'm sure.
No, I mean, the thing is, I'm more apt to watch it now because I think there are people on the quote other side now who are expressing views that I'm more likely to agree with.
Right.
So, and I am open to hearing what they have to say. And I want to speak to people who might see things differently than I do. So of course I went on Fox News.
Right.
It's a huge swath of this country.
Yeah.
And it's important. And these people aren't like bad people. They're just coming from a different perspective. And I want to understand that. And I want them to understand mine. So I really, just because academia is almost entirely liberal is not a good reason for me to not spread, what I know to the rest of the
But to me, I agree with you that you have to imagine most of it's liberal. I would think that would be the place to have
do
a view.
It. Of course. But within academia, like it's very hard for conservative students and faculty to express their views and ask their questions and do the kind of research that they might want to do. It's not an inclusive environment for conservatives, but no one seems to care about that kind of inclusivity.
Right. All right, let's talk about
the actual science or something.
Well, the issue of trans. The trans in sport issue, because that's what a lot of the series has been about. Although, as I just admitted, I've become more interested, or equally as interested in just this idea of how we can't have a conversation, and because these views are not necessarily popular, but the science of it, right? And so many folks that I've talked to as well. Even I had Roger Pielke on the show, who I've known for a long time, and he had an interesting view. He said, "Look, two for me, really two takeaways. One, I'm just going to follow the science.
Yeah.
And the other one, I asked him. I said, look at this. Just analyze the. And by the way, I never intend to single out Leah Thomas or her journey or any of it.
Yeah.
It's the case that most people refer to, and it's also the one that I could relate to the most because of my swimming background. Right. And I said to Roger, I said, look at the example of Leah Thomas. I said, is that fair? And his view he said, yeah, because she's playing by the rules.
Yes.
So
I agree. So it's not. I
don't know
fair
if that's a dodge of the question, but it is an answer to the question, and the rules are where they are. And then, that goes back to that old adage of, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
And if we don't like the rules, then go try to change the rules. But back to the science, I think that's where, the times that I've gotten in trouble with this, because I have held a view, and I will fully confess this, that no, this should not be allowed. I'm certainly open to another opinion, or could be potentially convinced. But at the end of the day, I'm just going to follow the science. And as I have gotten into this and read as much as I possibly could, I think I'm going to hear, certainly from you, that the science is pretty clear.
Yes. So I just want to go back to is it fair? Because there's a lot of criticism of the individual athletes who are competing in compliance with whatever organization's rules. Right. And a lot of people strongly disagree with me, and they want to criticize the individual athletes. And I personally think that isn't the right way to go. I would much rather focus on the policy and getting, people, if they have a problem, it should be with the rule makers, in my view. Right. That's where we should be focusing our attention. I think it's counterproductive to stigmatize individual athletes.
Right.
And we should really be focusing on.
And nobody knows what's going through Leah Thomas's head.
Yeah.
I mean, I often think like what, and this isn't I'm not trying to be a skeptic, but I am curious. Like when you're standing on the top step of any podium, like what, I don't know. I'm assuming Leah's like, this is great. I've worked hard for this. Like most athletes should think.
But she also has a huge amount of encouragement and support from within her community. Like she's coming from a very different place. People are telling her she's a hero and encouraging her. So she is not looking at it, through the lens of people who are advocating to protect the obviously, to protect the female category, which is they're very clear that the female category is for females only, and they're fighting for that. So maybe some of those people can't see why somebody like Leah Thomas wouldn't see that. But she's in a whole different universe, right?
A different echo chamber.
That's right.
There's two echo chambers.
That's right.
Yeah. So back to the science.
Yeah, sorry.
But that's all fascinating, and I think that's right.
Yeah.
I still think it would be hard for Leah Thomas to and just because despite living in that world and being encouraged and really admired and idolized.
Yeah.
I still think you probably hear and see a lot of the other side.
Yes.
As we know. But let's just educate, not just myself, but the audience on the science of it. Like, okay, if you forget let's throw the rules out, right? The governing bodies, the agencies, all of the people, they've set out some guidelines, right? The guidelines of, 2.5 nanomoles per whatever liter for 2 years now.
Yeah.
The science behind that, right? And the advantages, I think for most folks, it really comes down to the advantages of, like this book is about, testosterone, what that does in utero, what that does through puberty, what that does for a young man.
Yeah.
And can we
undo that?
Exactly.
So that's the question.
That is the
question that people are asking. So just a couple things. I just want to go back to sperm and eggs because the advantage, so testosterone is the way that sperm producers can develop the traits that enable them to maximize essentially their reproduction relative to egg producers. So in mammals and let's just take humans, females who are producing eggs need more fat. Mm-hmm. So they need to conserve energy to draw on to grow the human with their own body and then to produce the milk that the offspring needs, which you have to think about what that requires from an evolutionary point of view when you can't just go to the supermarket and buy all your food.
And we were talking about cavemen and cavewomen
now.
Yeah,
we're talking about, say, hunters and gatherers.
Right.
Like that's
what
our bodies and our psychology to a certain extent are the kind of lifestyle that we're adapted to where, so we I have a lot more fat than you do, right? So
as a woman.
Yes. And that is because of estrogen. So that's my reproductive hormone. And that enabled me to use the energy that I take in from the environment is used to support fat deposition rather than muscle deposition, right? So that's what I need. Estrogen helps me reproduce via, say, biasing me to accumulate and store more fat. And testosterone helps you to use that energy to be used for muscle development, right? So, and that's because male mammals can gain reproductive advantages and have over evolutionary history through physical competition, which is why you're bigger and stronger. Okay. And most men could kill most women with their bare hands, and the reverse is not true. Okay, so I just want to get that out on the table because that is what the sex difference in hormones is about. And then we have secondary sex characteristics.
Everything you just said, is there any controversy in that?
No.
there's no, okay, so.
No, I mean, actually that's not true. The same people, the same few.
Can we just be in a world where you say there's no
No, I
controversy?
can't, because the same few people who were extremely critical of the article that we were talking about earlier also are basically attempting to undermine the accuracy of what I just told you, and are even criticizing the traditional understanding of sexual selection, which is basically what I just described. They're trying to kind of rewrite that story.
And what is it that what did you say? What kind of biology did you teach?
It's evolutionary, human evolutionary biology.
Okay, so if you took, let me ask you a question. If you took the 100 top human evolutionary biologists and you put them in one room, how many would agree with the story so far? We haven't gotten to
the top ones over throughout the recent history. Say,
let's call it that.
If I had to guess, it would be about 99%. But it's that's what is the issue is that is now changing, in my view, not because of good evidence,
Carole,
but because of ideology.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, no, I know.
90.
I would guess, yeah. It's just,
if not all.
This is the total history of the field, yeah.
Okay, because that's how we all got to be sitting. You were sitting there. I am sitting here. We're in Colorado in the mountains.
Yeah, you have to explain why you and I have these different bodies.
Right. I'm not very smart, but I'm.
Why do you keep saying that?
I know that it's like a thing. It's a thing I say. But I know that I'm sitting in the mountains and I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And your jacket is blue. But okay, I think it's important. Look, all right, now carry on from there. Because if you told me half the room says, I don't know, it could have happened another way, or then it's a different conversation.
Yeah, no. This is well accepted within biology, and especially within evolutionary biology. But that's a whole other story.
Right. But the story up till now, I think.
And it's consistent with what we see in non-human animals.
I use the example all the time of global warming, because there are people that say it's real and they're not. Say it's not real, and I don't really know. Just imagine I don't know what to think. I'm gonna sit with 100 smartest people, and ask them, and if 100 of them say that it's real, I go
right.
It's real.
Right.
So I'm just trying to establish.
But sometimes the people are wrong. That. We could all be wrong. And that's why we have science. And that's why we need to focus on the claims that people are making rather than calling them names. What is happening now is the people who are trying to say that 99% of us are wrong are, instead of really purely just coming after the claims, there's this other layer of the people who are saying what, say, I'm saying are somehow bigoted and motivated by, racism or homophobia or whatever you want to call it. So the questions that we're asking are about why males have a physical advantage over females. That nobody should be questioning that. That is ridiculous for anyone to question that fact that males on average are bigger, stronger, faster, more powerful.
And we're talking about cis men and cis women.
I don't use the term cis myself. We're not. We're just talking about males and females. I don't care how you identify. I'm just talking about what testosterone does largely through male puberty. So, now of course we have people who are opting. We have males who are opting not to experience typical male puberty, but that's a whole other issue. But we're just talking about the natural state of males and females, and males are bigger, stronger, faster, et cetera. Right. That does not mean, and I want to make this clear, that I could not outrun, outlift, outjump some certain portion of males. Of course that's true, right? You're supposed to say, yes, of course you could.
Of course it's true. Right. Or there may be some sport that That even
That's
if you
right.
couldn't outrun or outjump or outlift them, that you were just really good
Maybe
at
I'm a better at archery or shooting or long
curling,
open
or,
water swimming.
Right. Okay, so there's some examples, but
Yeah.
but we're not talking about. I mean, we're trying to talk about.
So we're talking about
broadly.
most sports, and we're talking about equally trained athletes who are, I don't want to say at their prime, because if we're, both in the masters range, say over 60, but you want to compare apples to apples. So we're talking about, say, elite athletes, all other things being equal, males are going to beat men will be beating women. Like people say, some politician I think just said recently that no, Serena Williams could beat a lot of highly ranked professional tennis players because she's so strong and awesome. And she is incredible.
100%.
However,
no. By the way, nobody's going to debate that point.
The fact is she cannot beat even, a significantly a male tennis player who's much lower ranked than she is.
I think you quoted in the book.
That's right. When she was on David Letterman.
You had her appearance on David Letterman, and I think there was another quote from McEnroe who was was on another show. I don't recall where it was, but I think he said Serena couldn't beat the 700th
That's right.
ranked male player.
That's right.
Which of course Serena didn't like, and I know Serena well, so I can imagine she didn't like that.
But she knows it's a fact.
But that's not he got to your point.
Yeah, so that is what we want to keep in mind, right?
Okay.
So we have to explain the source of that male advantage. So no one can dispute that advantage exists in the first place. So the question is the typical advantage eliminated in males? And I have to say male here, and I know that can make some people uncomfortable, but it has to be clear that trans women are male. And if we're just going to assume that these are people who've gone through a high testosterone, typical male puberty, and then later, as part of their transition to living as a woman, suppress their testosterone. So the question, the idea is, if testosterone is the source of this advantage, which is in, overall muscle volume, strength, height, bone density, lung capacity, hemoglobin, VO2 max, et cetera. There's a huge number of physiological
data points
and physical advantages that translate into sporting, obviously, advantages. Are those eliminated when testosterone is then suppressed? So lean body mass, I just want to say, it's like, so if you and I go out running, even if you're my height, I have to carry just dead weight. I have to carry like 20 more pounds of dead weight where you have muscle. So of course I'm going to be slower. Like that is just going to slow me down. So women almost always have more fat than men, and men have more muscle. That right there is just a massive advantage. So you might think, okay, well, if males suppress testosterone, then that muscle is just going to be replaced with fat, and they'll be equal to females who went through female puberty, right?
And just pause 1 second for the purpose of this conversation, and I think just to educate the audience as well as myself, because I think when most people think of a transgender or a trans woman, I think there's some confusion around how. And let me just tell you, let me just be very honest. Like when our close employee went through this, our first question was like, how your mind goes to this place, like, how far are we going with this? Like, it's a question. It's you're not trying to be creepy.
Do you mean like hormones?
Is this
surgery,
hormones? Is
or
this
just
surgery?
clothes and makeup, or
yeah. But that's a logical question. It was certainly a question of mine. I could be a complete loser for having that question, but that was a question.
Well, it's a natural question. I think
question.
This is a good friend of yours, right? Yeah.
And but But when it comes to this issue and the examples, again, I'm just imagining, because it's my question, so I'm hoping it's some other people's question. The examples in sports, we're just talking about testosterone suppression, or are we seeing athletes that have gone a step further with gender reassignment or
you mean with surgery?
Surgery.
Yeah.
And would that make an even bigger difference?
No. So it doesn't matter.
Okay.
If you can remove the testicles, or you can have what could be called something like chemical castration. You can block the signal from the brain. There are different ways of suppressing testosterone. You can stop the signal from the brain that triggers testosterone production in the testes. You can block androgen receptors. You can remove the source of testosterone, which is the testicles. All of that will just result essentially in extremely low testosterone, which in some cases could even be lower than the natural female level.
And do we know what is the norm, if we can call it that, of testosterone suppression? Right? I mean, I don't want to. Yeah, let's just pick up.
So it's suppression with estrogen supplementation generally. So then the question is, what is the effect of suppressing testosterone on these physical and physiological parameters, and then actual sports performance, right?
Right.
So the idea is, well, if suppressing testosterone can eliminate those advantages, then it would be fair for trans women who have gone through hormonal transition to participate in the female category. I would agree. If you can show that there's no retained advantage and that trans women, and I'll just say natal females in this case, are equal on average, great. But that's not the case at all. That's not what's going on. We don't have that evidence. In fact, we have evidence that shows the opposite is true.
Okay, so then people would say, then what are we talking about?
Well, there's a couple things that we're talking about. We're talking,
or why are we talking about it?
Because there's two ways to look at this. One is to criticize what I and many other scientists think is extremely robust science, showing that there is a retained advantage. And it's actually quite interesting from my point of view why it is that suppressing testosterone doesn't result in a much greater reduction in muscle mass and other outcomes. Of course, it doesn't reduce height. It has a minimal impact on bone density. Heart and lung volume don't change. So that's all obvious. Hemoglobin does tank down to typical female levels. But what's really interesting is that very little muscle mass is lost. Relatively little strength is lost.
And certainly height is not lost.
Yeah, so all of that stuff is retained. So that's interesting. Why is that? And we don't completely understand why that's the case, but we also have evidence from people with prostate cancer who have to suppress testosterone for prostate cancer. They experience similar degrees of muscle loss, which can be offset through strength training. So for athletes, of course, they're going to be strength training. So this can buffer some of their muscle and strength loss in the face of essentially zero testosterone. So if males have typically 40% more or more, depending on the part of your body, especially males are significantly stronger relative to females in the upper body. If, say, there's 40 to 50% greater strength in men over women, you lose a maximum of 5 to 10% of that after a year or two. I mean, that's what the evidence shows. But so the reason we're still talking about this is because there's a sort of ethical and social argument to be made. And then there's people criticizing the science. So the activists who are, say, pro-trans women in the female category are trying to show that this science that we do have is not clear and strong enough.
So therefore?
to exclude trans women. They're like, look, you don't have the studies showing that trans women would necessarily beat, I'll just say, natal females in sports. You don't have the studies with large enough sample sizes. You don't have enough trans women athletes and their outcomes. So you can't show that. So by default, trans women should be included in the female category.
But the first part, that we don't have enough of that, or we don't have enough examples, or the sample pool, is that true? And then we'll get to the second part.
So I'll just say what we do have is very clear evidence from smaller samples, generally, of non-elite athletes. Athletes, but not like super elite athletes. And that all the evidence we have shows that the male advantage is retained some degree. There's a decline in performance when you suppress testosterone. There's a decline in muscle mass. There's a decline in hemoglobin. So performance does go down, but it does not go down enough to nowhere near enough to sort of match female levels, because there's other retained advantages. So we have all of that data, but what we don't have is some huge population of trans women in elite sports and their actual sporting outcomes. And we're never probably going to have that.
Well, that was my follow-up question.
Yeah, I don't think...
Is there not a possibility to have the gold standard study that with this pool of people that gets to... Because if we don't get to that answer, this is not going to stop.
Well, it needs to stop because it's a female category. And if you're going to do this experiment where you say, okay, we don't have the data, so by default, we're just going to allow trans women into the female category, you are violating the whole purpose of the female category, which is exclusion. Like, the reason we have a female category is to exclude male-bodied people, to give people like Serena Williams a chance to be the very best. If males could play in the female category in tennis, she'd have no chance of ever accomplishing what she accomplished.
Well, and I read this somewhere, and you got to go way back, right? And this is, as I read it, this is the timeline of how we came to even have a Serena Williams. The timeline, this is, of course, going way back, right? You had sports, whatever the sports were. It could be the Greeks, and they're throwing rocks. I don't know what they were doing. And there were all the guys out there. It was just these Greek gods out there competing. And then time moves on, and there was a lady who said, well, I want to get out there and try this. And she obviously didn't throw the rock nearly as far as the Greek god or whatever. And then, keep fast forwarding. And then somebody at some point said, well, golly gee, I think we should probably just, these women are not throwing the rock as far as the Greek god. We better just set up a women's category. Right. Which they did. But, that was also, it didn't have the same advantages of being an elite male athlete. And then along came Title IX.
1972, yeah.
1972, which said, okay, all right, 500 years ago, none of you girls competed, and then some of you wanted to compete, and now you're just not getting the same looks or the same opportunities as these guys, so we're going to establish Title IX. It's been 51 years ago, and we're going to create equal opportunity there. Yeah. Right, so and then, again, 51 years ago. Which really, I think, for the people on your side and a large side of this, that's a big deal, right? Protecting Title IX. But that really, as I read it, that was sort of the timeline of how women came to really have their own platform, right? Their own glory. I mean, look, Serena is actually an amazing example. If you think back to 20 years ago in professional women's tennis, well, she's probably playing 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And, before the Williams sisters and before the greatness, and, prize purses were less, media coverage was less, everything was less. And it took an athlete, it took a star, it took a superstar like them to make it. I mean, I don't know, if I have a choice of watching Rafa Nadal or Serena Williams, I'll probably watch Serena Williams.
Yeah.
I don't know. Part of me is like, do we have to watch the girls' match? No, it's
Right.
It's just as badass.
Right.
And so we've gotten to this place. And I mean, my thing is, as I've said, it's complicated, but I just, and if I put myself in the shoes of the trans community and that wants this to happen, I worry for them that, let's say Serena's in her prime and and who knows, we'll make up the person, right? So, let's not make up the person. Let's say that Rafa Nadal, has some issue or, wants to transition and wins the Wimbledon final, or, somebody wins the 100-meter dash at the Olympic. I think that's a net negative. And I hate that for the community, actually. I don't think that's a net positive.
No, I don't either. I think it doesn't help that is how people are connecting with, I'll just say, gender nonconforming or people who are transitioning or have transitioned or who have gender dysphoria, who need support.
Right.
And
to me,
this really gets me, because I have a lot of sympathy for just letting people live their lives. They don't all want their lives and sort of identities to be represented by people who are pushing to, say, have trans women be able to self-identify into female prisons or into female sports, right? Those are contentious issues. And they're legitimately contentious. We should just be able to talk about them openly. And I totally agree with you. I don't think it's helping. I don't think it's helping that sort of cause. But what I do think we can discuss is, well, what about, say, kids in high school? If you have a trans girl in high school who's an athlete who really wants to compete, what do we do? How do we address this issue? So that's a whole other issue. But that's what the advocates are saying is, look, these people some of them are like legally female. Right. They're living as women. They have their birth certificates changed. They should be able to compete in the female category. And so that does have to be dealt with. Like, that issue has to be addressed. That has to be discussed. And because there's sort of a clash there. But to me, the reason for the female category is to give females a chance to win.
And what you said, this is another thing I really hate about this, is talking about the trans girl in high school. Then it's a political issue, right? I mean, we've, just last week, Governor Greg Abbott in my home state of Texas passed this legislation banning this. I don't think it has anything to do with Greg Abbott. I don't think it has anything to do with politics. I mean, it does, because it is happening. Right. But to me, this comes down to what is the best science out there. What do the governing bodies have to say about this? If they can't read whatever we have available, the best science, or fund the sort of gold standard of this issue and make a decision, I think those are muddy waters and really dangerous waters.
But what about the argument, just to steelman it, what about the argument that it really, and I think it should not be about the science is closed. And I think it's a mistake for I'll just say the trans inclusion side. It's a mistake for them to focus on the science, because they're not going to win that way.
They would say, and you know what they would say, that the science out there was not using the right people, the right examples.
And they'll also say
therefore the science isn't right.
Yes, and what is happening is also I think this is the source of the undermining of the validity of the male and female being two distinct and real biological categories. So that's all happening. But what about the argument that, no, this is socially the right thing to do? we have to support this community. These people have hard lives. How would you, I'll turn it to you. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would respond that I have a ton of empathy for that.
Yeah.
I don't think athletes, or specifically young athletes, all grew up with perfect rosy lives that had the best facilities and the best coaches and the Mercedes-Benz to take them to morning practice. I mean, look, I know how I grew up. I found my way, and as you start to find your way, you find, the best coaches, the best facilities, the best training, the best nutrition. But look, I mean, what is the biggest sport in America?
Football.
It's football.
Yeah,
football's the biggest sport in America. We're the majority of the players in the NFL, probably came. I mean, as we know, football in the South. They probably. Are you telling? I mean, all of those young men grew up. Not all, but a lot of them grew up under tough circumstances.
So you're saying, look, these aren't the only people that have hard lives, and that it's not fair to make exceptions for them at the expense of, say, females who also have a lot of challenges.
Exactly.
What you're sort of saying, why are we prioritizing the needs of this specific category of people who do happen to be male? Right? Okay.
In fact, I would argue that most athletes, I think the best athletes, come from kind of tough, fucked up young lives.
So yeah, that is this is the thing that sort of changed my view on this, because I had never really expressed a view, for a long time on this issue. I talked about the science.
In fact, I would argue that it's an advantage.
What?
The kid who's been who's just been dealing with headwind and crosswind and tough times and had to figure it out, versus the kid that had the silver spoon and all the facilities.
Right.
When have they been the world champion or the Olympic men? It's the ones that have been hardened over time. So if that's your question, I think that's more the norm.
And I think it's through I've had conversations with a lot of with trans athletes, but also then with female athletes, gold medal winners, their families, and they are all working so incredibly hard and devoting their lives to their sport. And I just don't, it's a female category. It's to protect females. And if there's no science to show that trans women don't lose their advantage, there's just no question. It's not about identity, it's about bodies. Of course, there's psychology and effort, et cetera. But, all of that being equal, the science shows that there's an advantage retained.
Okay. Last thing.
Yeah.
Can you imagine a world with all that you know where there is some solution from a scientific and a biology standpoint? Is there ever a way that this is quote unquote fair?
No.
Okay.
No. But the solution, I think, has to be...
No is a safe answer. It's not... I don't know the answer. It's genuinely a question. If the answer to you,
somebody's going to suffer. Somebody's going to be upset. But I think the solution is to make what we now know as the male category an open category. Just have a protected female category and have an open male. That is, it's definitely not ideal. It doesn't satisfy people's needs and desires. It's
or an entirely separate category. Trans female, trans male.
I'm not really in favor of that.
But back to the question, because I know you got to run, but everything you know, everything you've read, all your experience and history with this, there's not a solution.
I hate to say that, but right now, I don't see it.
Okay. Carole Hooven, thank you.
Thank you, Lance.
I really appreciate it. I'm going to finish the book now. And I told you I don't read books. I read like 3 chapters
Wait,
today.
Really? You going to finish it? Show the cover. Show the cover.
I'm telling you this.
All right.
It was easy to read. I don't
Really?
know. Yeah.
Thank you. I love
Can
that.
we talk about
Thank
Genghis
you.
Khan now?
No.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.